Welcome back. I'm MCNEW, and this is Duty, Grit, and Grinds. We're doing something different today. Here in the studio, I have two new guests. Guest number one is my wife, Felicia. I mentioned her in the first episode as the brainchild of the podcast, and so she is here. Guest number two is my 17-year-old daughter, Josie. She also mentioned in the first episode, just realizing, as she was the teen driver out of gas at the Dutch Bros. So the reason they're on the show today is this. In my last podcast, filmed it was about a variety of things, but I went off on a tangent about why I worked as a teenager and how that funded my driving privilege. I was responsible for my insurance and for my gas, and so I had a job, and I was responsible for myself. And it was a lesson in adulthood. And so taking that and borrowing it from my parents, I have applied that with my wife to our kids. And so we have kids who drive, and there's naturally a utility to that. And so one of the shorts that was created out of the last podcast was a 48 second clip about teens driving, the freedom that creates, the responsibility that is inherent in it, and then the utility that it provides to parents. And it's 48 seconds long, pulled from an hour and something minute long podcast. And so it's a little bit out of context, although it's accurate. And so I came home the other day, and I had been out. It was evening, and these two chuckleheads were in my bedroom, and they were hot. They were twisting off about a comment on this short, which had, at the time, 500 something views and one comment. And I had seen the comment, and it was a person who had an opinion about teen drivers and parents using them as the family taxi. And I just kind of brushed it off as one person's opinion, and that was the end of it for me. However, these guys were hot about it. They were ready to go to war with this poor lady, I think, based on the handle. And here's the comment. I'm going to put it on the screen, and this is what this lady had to say about the 48-second video of teens driving and the utility that provides for parents. And so I wasn't overly offended. In fact, I wasn't offended at all. I read this a little bit differently. In it, there is some you, she says you, and that's fine. I read that kind of generically to say, like, if you, as someone reading this, not you, MCNEW, if you don't want to go to your kids' practices, or you believe that it's one child's responsibility to drive another, don't have kids, you don't really want them. You just want the perceived legitimacy of being a parent. And I guess I just read that generically to speak to the whole world. And maybe she was speaking to me. I mean, we have 6 kids, and 4 of them drive. One of them is very successful in college right now. One of them is very successful in the working world and living on her own. And all of that started, I think, in part due to them driving and having jobs as teens. And I would love to break this down with this person a little bit more. I guess I'm not familiar with the perceived legitimacy of being a parent. Being a parent's a lot of work, and I guess I don't know who I'm trying to impress by having a bunch of kids. But so I had a different perspective. They were hot about it. And so we're going to dive into this thing of teens driving with one of the teens, the third teen we taught to drive. And then we're going to give some background on why we do it this way and our style of parenting and why we think it adds value to them as contributing adults. And so that's my intro. That's who I am and what we're going to do. But now we need to at least just say hello to the guests. And so, Joe, say hello.
Hi, I'm Josie.
Good enough.
And do I have to say anything else?
No. Okay. I guess one thing I'll add is Josie's quite a character. And when the camera was not rolling and she or we were goofing off a little earlier, she was very dynamic. But then now she's acting all stuffy. But she will loosen up as the video goes on. And so that's Josie. We won't spend much more time with an introduction because we'll just get right into the meat of it. But Flea is what I call Felicia. And so Flea, say hello.
Hi.
Actually, as a part of your intro, just give like a sentence or two about why we started this thing. What kind of the vision in your brain was, or why you thought this goofy podcast would be a good idea.
You love to talk, you love to tell stories, and people love hearing you, and that's really it. I think you have a lot of good things to say. I love hearing you myself, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, that's sweet. Thank you. Josie, so now we know your name, and we know you're 17 and you belong to this family. But beyond that, you're a senior in high school. And just to get you, part of what we're doing here is just lubricating our talking muscles. And so tell us a little bit about being a senior in high school in the year 2024.
Being a senior in high school is kind of hard this year because I feel like there's a lot of different, like our world has changed a lot. And so there's a lot of different things happening that I would not have expected in a public high school normally, especially from my first 3 years of high school. There's just a lot of like weird things happening in school, but it's good. It's fun and memorable, and I think I took advantage of my first 3 years, and I didn't really look at it as like an opportunity. I more just looked at it as something that I was having to do every day. But now that I'm a senior and I'm realizing how important it is, it's been really fun, and I think I've been making the most out of it.
You say you squandered your first 3 years.
Yes, I did.
You wasted them away.
Yeah.
Oh, that's only that's not true at all. So let's just go back in time to driving. Do you remember Josie, do you remember the first time you ever drove? Like an actual motor vehicle with like a car or a truck or anything like that? You do remember it?
Yeah.
When was that?
Well, I was like 8.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the beach.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. It was scary because I had never driven a car before, but it was just like oh, you should do this. And then it was like okay.
Yeah. So you were 8 and we were on the beach. What were we driving?
I think your old truck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a half-ton Chevy Silverado pickup truck, right. And so you were alone in the driver's seat, you slammed it in drive, and off we went.
Well, no.
Well, tell me about it.
Well, obviously it wasn't like, okay, just get in the front seat. It was like hey, do you want to drive? Yeah. And of course I wanted to drive because I always wanted to drive. I always wanted to grow up faster than I was. But obviously I was excited. I was like, yes, I want to drive. And so there was like some talking up to it, like while you were driving. It was like, okay, well, this is what you're going to do. Like, this is the gas, this is the brake. And so then it was like, are you sure you want to do this? Yeah, of course I do. So pulled over and I got in the front, and it wasn't like, put it in drive and go. It was like another, like, okay, this is what you have to do. I mean, I was really eager to go, but there was lots of explaining. I had to wait, be patient before I could take off.
But then other than that, we just put an 8-year-old in the driver's seat and said, go.
Well, kind of.
Yeah. So, Flea, do you remember your first driving experience?
Yes. Well, my first driving experience was in California with my babysitter, Jenny, who put me on her lap and let me steer all the way home. Jenny, I don't know if you should have done that, but it was really fun. I felt really cool and I loved it. My intro into driving was age 15, maybe 14. And just, my mom taking me out on the back roads and showing me how to get it done.
So when I was maybe not 8, maybe 9 or 10, my grandpa had an old 60s Ford pickup truck that we would use to pick up hay bales in the field. And the field was like it was like on the property. So it wasn't like we had to drive down the road to get there. But the pickup truck, the job was drive straight down the rows because I wasn't big enough to huck a hay bale. The job was drive straight, and people hucked hay bales and stacked them up. And the memory I have is that the way you knew you were doing it correctly was we had a German short-haired dog at the time named Hooter. And you knew you were doing it right if you could keep Hooter on top of the stack of hay bales, because Hooter would just like run up the hay. And so this is how we learned to drive in the hayfield with Hooter. And so beyond that, I spent a fair amount of time driving gravel roads, beach roads, before you have a license, in places where it's legal to do it, probably. Hard to say now, but I guess it makes sense to expose people to driving before they hit the road. Not really what the podcast is about. So when we had our first daughter coming up on the age of driving, in my mind, because the daughters are the oldest, in my mind, the way this is going to work is the way it worked for me, because I thought it worked well. And so to your sister, to Casey, it was, hey, if you're going to drive, you got to work. And so we helped her get a job by pointing her out because when you're 15, it's not like you can just drive yourself and apply for jobs. It's very difficult. And also, it's difficult to work at 15. It's difficult to get people to take you seriously at 15. And what year was this? This was like just pre-pandemic, if I remember right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was 2019. Yeah. So we helped Casey get a job, and she's going to work, and that kind of starts this tradition in our house with this generation of teen drivers. And so I guess what I was trying to explain when these guys were twisting off about this comment is when we have a teenager who is coming up to the age to be able to drive, you have an opportunity to create a microenvironment of the real world where they have responsibilities for their own safety. They have responsibilities for the financial obligations of a vehicle. You got to buy the gas and pay the insurance. And it's not that parents that we can't afford those things. It's that this is our first opportunity to have you doing something that adults do with the responsibilities that adults have for it while you're still living under this roof. And so you've got to manage the schedule of having a job, of going to school, and of doing sports and having friends and relationships and all that stuff. And so to me, it just makes too much sense. That's the reason for it. So again, it's not that it can't be paid for by the parents. It's that up to that point in your life, we've just handed you so much. And so if the goal is for you to someday not live here, this is the first way we make it kind of uncomfortable to live here, meaning you're getting a taste of being responsible for bills. And so on top of that, driving is also it's your first venture out into the real world, and we get to, early on and later on, you get to control what those trips look like with curfews and constant communication. And so I'm going here, can I go here? After school, I want to go to this place. And so as trust builds, your freedom expands. And then the next thing you know, you're driving at night, and maybe you're driving, outside of the immediate geographic area, things like that. And so I just think teen driving is just such a great way to help kids grow up into adult responsibility in a controlled way. And so I guess that's why I push back on the comment of being a family taxi, because the point in the full context of the previous video was, as a utility, once all of the things I've just said are in place, as a utility, you're also going to the same place as your sister who cannot drive yet. Of course you're going to take her, right? You're going there in the car that we've provided for you and that you pay for. And so, of course, your little sister is going to be your passenger. You do the same sport after school. Of course you're going to bring her home after. And so it's not that you're driving to be our taxi. It's that and that was the ultimate point of what I was saying. That's why it's last on the list of freedom, responsibility, and utility. You become a utility to the parents because of your ability to drive. And so I guess this person, obviously in the comment, is a driving school instructor, maybe the owner, I can't remember. Nope, instructor. And so they have their own experiences with a variety of families. She didn't know our family, so I'm not mad, Savane. But I do stand by the way we do business around here. It works really well for us. You also have to understand, like, we are in an inner city environment. We're not in a massively urban or rural environment where you've got a 75-minute drive to school down a country road that's gravel and snowy conditions uphill both ways. You're 3 miles from school, 1.5 of which is freeway, or you could take the back roads. And so our geographic location also lends to it working for us. If you went to school 20 minutes away, that might have changed some of the way we do it. If it wasn't possible for you to work, any variety of things. This work, I guess what I'm saying is, because of where we are, it works for us. And so the just before I hand it over, just reading down her comment a little bit, even a 17-year-old teenager does not have the mental acuity or the experience to keep themselves completely safe, let alone the other children in the family. Totally agree. That's why we do this. I guess to that, what I would say is, where I gained experience and mental acuity is by honing my skills and my knowledge through experience and training. And so the way we have been training our kids is by allowing them to drive in small increments. In Washington State, they're able to get their permit at 15. And so the moment our kids were to 4, with one coming up soon, 4 of our kids at 15 had become our driver. They one-on-one at first, and then slowly with both the parents, and in a very slow introduction of the other kids sometimes in the car. They learn to drive from 15 to 16 by just getting dozens, if not hundreds of hours of driving. They just drive a lot before they're cut loose on their own at 16. So they get a year of really solid experience, where any time we're going out, that 15-year-old driver is driving one of the parents' grocery stores and themselves to school, just for us to do the Chinese rodeo around the car, or fire drill around the car. And so much experience. And so to the comment that the mental acuity and experience, yeah, I just think this is where experience comes from. I think that at 43, I am the collective sum of my training experience, and every day as I learn new skills, I do that through practical experience. And so, yeah, we are in total agreement that they do not have the experience to keep themselves completely safe. And so that is a huge reason we do this the way we do, and that is why we slowly introduce the other kids in when it becomes appropriate. And so we could also be reading a lot into her comment that she didn't mean. And of course, internet comments should be taken with a grain of salt, but it did create an opportunity to get a couple guests on the show. So I have talked enough. Josie, tell us about learning to drive when you're 15. When you first got your permit, tell us about learning to drive.
Learning to drive was, I think I drove, like you said, everywhere. It was never like, I don't want to drive, because I did always want to drive, and I wanted to make sure that I was a good driver when I was 16, and so I took any opportunity I could to drive, like going to the grocery store. I know there was lots of times where, Like we practiced in the church parking lot, the bottom of our hill, parking and driving around like normally and stuff. But like I was always driving everywhere that I can think of. And most of the time, like it was just through town or like on the highway. I know we took a little bit longer to get to the freeway so that I felt more comfortable. But I remember just driving everywhere to make myself feel the most comfortable that I could before driving on my own.
What about when you had two sisters learn to drive before you? So what was your experience when they were learning to drive?
I was a little bit scared. I was a little scared. I was a little more scared for one of them. But I don't think it was because I didn't trust her driving. I think it was because she made it clear that she didn't trust herself driving. And so when I was in the car and knew she didn't even feel comfortable with being in the driver's seat, I felt a little scared for my life. But they would drive everywhere too. And so like it kind of just felt normal for me. Like that was what I expected when I turned 15 was I was going to drive everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it was a little scary at first though, easing into being their passengers. I was a little scared.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the first car you had in a second, but first of all, when I just did that whole big diatribe on the parenting philosophy that led us to teen drivers, freedom, responsibility, and utility. But you didn't, I didn't give you a chance to comment. And so, Flea, I want you might have some thoughts on that. So I was kind of hoping you'd add comment to kind of the parental philosophy that I explained. And that was from my words, my perspective, but I'm curious what yours were.
I think that in regards to driving, and I don't know how it will be with boys, but with our girls, it had a lot to do with extending our trust in them and then also building their confidence. So, that took a lot for me. I mean, you know as well as I do that I did not enjoy the early stages of driving with many of them because it is scary because they are not good and there is a lot of stuff going on and lots of stuff coming at you all at once. And they work through that. The first few months at 15 is terrifying. But those first few months, when you are willing to get into a car with your child and say, let's do this, you got this, like it just builds so much confidence. And so I'm with you 100% there.
What about the reasoning behind, like the philosophical reasoning behind growing them into adults through this thing of driving and of getting a job to support it? Like, what of the philosophical reasoning, parenting ideas behind that?
It being their first step of independence, probably not the first step, but one of the steps. We have a lot of routines and ways that we develop independence in our kids, and that's from when they're very little, instilling, boundaries with how they spend their time and chores and responsibility to us and to one another and for their spaces. So I think it's an extension of them becoming adults. And you're right, we can afford all those things, but it's important for them to realize that with responsibility, I don't know what I was going to say.
Well, one of the things, while you think about it, one of the things, you're right, it's not the first thing we do to teach them to be adults. It's the first time they get to practice it independently in the real world. So I was just telling the story the other day that one of the funny things I would say at dinner when we were talking about table manners, if someone was starting to malfunction at the dinner table, would be to say, hey, every meal is an opportunity to practice like the Queen's coming. And so we're not from England. We don't have a queen, but it was just a funny way of saying we are here, you get to make your mistakes here, but you are really practicing table manners. Every meal is an opportunity to impress the next guest we have over for dinner, which, there were often, we have a full table every night when there's 8 people. And so, you get my point. It's that was a way to prepare for adulthood. But when we're talking about driving, it is the first opportunity you get to put all of the other things we've taught them together with this new thing and send them out into the world to practice being, a grown-up. And so that's really what I meant. Not that it's the first thing we did to teach them to be a grown-up. And so I don't know if you haven't thought of what you were going to say or had anything to add to that.
Privilege, responsibility. That's where I was going with that.
Yeah. Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So, Josie, your first car, back up. I'm teasing that first car again because it's a huge flex. But let's back up. You had to get a job. So when your oldest sister, Casey, had to get a job, she ended up at a local sporting goods shop, which, well known in the community, great supporter of the community, and they put her to work. And so we were thankful for that. And then she worked there for 2 years, and as she graduated high school, needed full-time employment to pay the bills and move out and do all the things that you do. She was only working 17, 20 hours a week, and she needed full-time opportunity, and they did not have that to offer, and so she had to leave. But before she left, you apply, and you basically pass at the doorway where she puts her 2 weeks in and leaves, and they offer you a job, and then they employ a few dozen people, right? They've got maybe 100 employees. I don't know. There's a lot of employees. And so it's what I thought was kind of neat. What I like to tell people is Casey probably got that first job on my name recognition. Like I knew the owner, and he and I talked, and I knew one of the managers, and I said, hey, I got a kid who needs a job. She's a hard worker. She'll do whatever you ask. She's a hard worker. And so I felt good putting my rubber stamp on her name. But in a lot of ways, she was given that opportunity because she was a safe bet. She was MCNEW's kid. And so I feel like she probably got that leg up because of me. And what I thought was kind of nice was, and this is what I tell people, 2 years of her working there, you were not my daughter, you were Casey's sister. And so because of the reputation she had made as a hard worker, you kind of got hired on that credibility, which was kind of neat. And so talk about what it was like to start work for the first time at 16.
It was scary.
Because you're in customer service,
Yeah.
selling fishing licenses, selling hunting rifles and fishing poles and hunting clothing and stuff you know almost nothing about. Not nothing, but almost nothing.
Making change at the cash register.
Yep, counting money. Yeah. So you're 16, you're working the customer service desk, selling fishing licenses, dealing with crotchety old men and women and Karens and Garys and whatever they call that guy. And so tell us about it.
Well, I actually didn't start as a cashier. I started in our workwear department. So I wasn't doing all of the things, but I was still doing return slips that the cashiers would send back to us. We would have to look in our inventory, find when it was sold, what their barcode was so that the specific one matched up with the sticker. And so I wasn't really doing all of the things at first. It was a good taste into something else rather than just being on a computer. I got to see how all of the departments did all of the things that lead to the last step of the store, which is being a cashier. And so it was about, I think, 5 months into me working that I did become a cashier. And it was really hard at first because there's a book that we follow, but after a week of training, it's kind of I hope you understand the book, because once it gets busy, you can't look back on it. Or there's a line and people looking at you what are you doing? You're supposed to know this. And there's hundreds of things to memorize. and so many buttons to push, and it was really scary, and I messed up lots and lots of times, but there is people who aren't mean and they are understanding, which made me feel nice, because there is the people who are like, what's wrong with you? Like, this is your job. Why don't you know how to do this? And so I felt pretty bad about myself when I didn't know how to do things, but there was people who were like, I get it. Like, it's your first job. You don't need to know how to do everything. So that was nice, because I was really scared, because I did mess up quite a few times, but it was hard. I mean, now it's pretty easy for me now, but it was definitely something difficult to transition into, going from like not wanting to do the dishes to not having a choice to do my job.
So some kids, they for any and every parent is going to do things a little different, but some kids don't have that experience. They don't work until they're out. They have things provided for them, which is fine, or they have other obligations at home, which is also fine. So I'm just talking about our experience, but one of the things that philosophically I like about our kids have all gone into some sort of customer service, and that is also a nice way of showing you that the world is not all sunshine and rainbows. Like there are people out there who it's your first experience outside of school and teachers, probably, or maybe in sports, to meet total strangers who treat you a variety of different ways, kindly, rudely, whatever. And so you start to develop like people skills and acuity for like talking to strangers. And so I also think there's a huge skill in that. So all 4 kids have worked sporting goods, coffee shop, McDonald's, sporting goods. And so I think that there's also a huge benefit to exposing you to the real world, not sheltering you from it until the day you move out and go, oh my gosh, this world is full of nuts, right? Because you deal with crazy tweakers, shoplifters, kind old grandmas, deranged hunters, like everything, right? So there's a benefit to that. And so that's an added utility to your development. So, did you work when you were in school?
Let me think. I did work as a 14 and 15-year-old, cleaning a church. Mm-hmm. I did not work my high school years because I was very, very busy with sports, school, clubs, and that was my parents' choice. They wanted me to focus on getting perfect grades and getting scholarships, so that's what I did.
Yeah, I actually knew the answer to that question. So that was the whole the road I was hoping you'd go down, and so my point was it was a different way of doing it that was important to your parents who had a different style. And it was important for them that you pour your heart and soul into school and sports. And I guess if you want to share, that was like your pathway to success in having a life different than the one that they had. So I don't know if you want to talk about that. But it's just a different way of doing it.
Well, I graduated valedictorian of my high school, and I got a scholarship to a military college, and I went into the military at age 17. So that was the path that I took.
Yeah. So, but you did drive.
Yes.
Yep. And so how would that pay for? How was that venture funded?
I didn't drive very much, and just to and from school, which was probably, a couple miles away. So I'm thinking back, I'm sure my parents did just pay for those things. And like you said, it was different, but
I guess my point, because I knew the answer to that question. My point was it was another way of teaching the same lessons. Like you learned responsibility, and you learned independence because you were in clubs and traveling with clubs. You were in sports and traveling with sports. You were obviously highly focused on school, as valedictorian of a pretty gigantic school. And so there's more than one road to success. And so let's go back to I come home. It was Wednesday night. I walk into the bedroom and you guys are like twisting off about this lady. And so I waited this long. I waited 35 minutes of recording or so that you guys had some time to talk, because it was a hilarious thing to walk in on. And again, I had seen this comment. I had read it. I had brushed it off as like, the internet has opinions, and I don't get too wound up about that. But you guys were spun up, and so I know we can't recreate that conversation, but I would like you guys to just talk about how that conversation started and what I walked in on.
Well, so I was in bed already. I think it was only 8:30, but I go to bed pretty early, and Josie came back from, I think, a team dinner or some sort of event like that. And she always comes to find us and to greet us. And that's nice. Thank you. And she goes, "Hey." And I said, "Hey, I'm about to respond to a comment." And she goes, "What?" And here's the thing, like, Brandon is very gracious, and I am not. If I see someone who is criticizing his parenting or his love for his children, no way. So, I read her the comment. I read her what I was proposing to comment back, which basically was it wasn't mean, but it was probably a more sarcastic way of saying all the things that Brandon has said, which is that we want to trust our kids and instill these things in them when they're young, because we want independent children who, at 17, maybe they do go to the military, or at 20, maybe they do become a police officer. So, what do you remember from the conversation?
Well, I remember when she read me the comment, I was like, no. Like, that was kind of my first out loud phrase, was like, why? No. And so we were talking about, because we hadn't actually watched the whole video.
That's true.
We had also just watched the short. We hadn't gotten to watching the whole video yet. So we watched the short, and then Felicia read me her comment. And after she read me the comment that the lady left, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's great. Like, you should definitely comment that." And she was like, "Yeah." And so we were just like finding ways to reword this comment that we were going to say back to her, finding ways to make it more Brandon approved. And then my dad walked in, and I'm like standing by the bed. Like, I'm standing up. I'm like, I'm flailing my arms around. Felicia's like sitting up now, not laying down. And he's like, "What is happening?" And so I'm standing there, and she's like, "Well, this person, like, did you see this comment?" And before he can even like respond, I'm like freaking out. Like, "Yeah, did you see this comment? Like, this is not okay." Like, finding every words to say about how much I was very angry.
Not bad words. We were just
not bad words.
We're offended on Brandon's behalf.
We took offense on his behalf because we recognize his hard work, and we felt like it wasn't recognized through that comment.
And I will just say, the proof is in the pudding. Our kids are absolutely amazing. They're all leaders. They are all just such wonderful young adults. And I just continue to be amazed by this one and all the others. And we did that.
Yeah. So.
And more people. More people are part of this party, but.
Well, that's worth mentioning. So, I was just about to mention that. So, if you can't tell by the dark hair of the one on the right and the blonde, blue eyes on the left, Josie is my daughter from previous marriage, as is the oldest daughter, as is the youngest daughter. And then I have two stepdaughters that fall in between those three. And so, as a collective, we've all embraced this parenting philosophy. So Josie's mom also played a huge part in teaching them to drive, supporting the philosophy, believing in the philosophy of like this is how we raise independent kids in this world. That, there are a lot of people out there who live in parents' basements at 35 years old and can't take care of themselves, and that's just not what we're going for. And so this is the way we decided this works. And so now there have been some bumps in the road. So episode 1, I had decided to film that day. That episode, don't go back and watch it. It's not worth your time.
It's funny.
It's a very awkwardly edited video. I didn't really know how to talk to a camera yet. Not that I'm an expert at it now, but if you think this is bad, go back and watch episode 1. But in that, I hadn't decided necessarily what to talk about that day. And then as I'm preparing to film that day, Josie calls in a panic and needs rescued because, well, Joe, why don't you tell the story?
Okay. Well, I was on my way to work, and my gas light had come on the night before. I think it might have been the midday before, but I had just gone to school and I was just driving home from practice. So it was evening, and I was like, it's fine. I'll get gas on my lunch break tomorrow. And so I was on my way to work, and I wanted to stop for a coffee because I had a free one on my app. So I was like, okay, well, I have to treat myself. And
Dutch Bros.
Yes. And so I get into the Dutch Bros drive-thru, and they'd just taken my order. I roll up my window, and I'm 2 or 3 cars behind the window. And my car starts making this rumbling sound. And I'm like, well, this isn't good. And I knew it wasn't good because it sounded familiar to what my green car made when it broke down. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, this isn't good. But I know my car isn't breaking down because it's a great car, super reliable, thankfully. And so I was like, what is going on? And then all of the lights turn on, and I was like, oh no, I know what's going on. So I put it in park, and my first thought was put your e-brake on, because I'm I don't really know, is this car gonna roll forward? So I put my e-brake on, and I get out of the car, and I'm freaking out, I'm hysterical. And the Dutch Bros worker, there's lots of cars behind me because this is 10:30 on a Saturday.
Tell us a little bit about Dutch Bros on a Saturday. So you said something important. You're 3 cars back from the window because these places get so busy that Chick-fil-A, they walk down the line of cars taking orders. So what's a Dutch Bros, specifically this one, on a Saturday?
It's very, very busy, especially with my experience. It's 9 to noon, especially because it's when everyone's going to work and stuff, unless it's old people that work earlier. But so I was there, and normally it's on the road, you can see the line from the Starbucks down the road, when you're driving. And it gets really, really cramped up, all the cars, there's 2 lanes. And so all the cars are just kind of intertwining. And like you said, they do at Chick-fil-A, the people come out and take your order. And then sometimes if it's really, really busy, they'll even walk out with your order and hand it to you so that you don't even have to go up to the window. You can just go, you just drive past the window.
Is she gonna have to restart?
No. Just keep talking.
And so it gets really busy, and that was what it looked like on this Saturday morning. It was very busy. They had just taken my order. There was probably 8 cars at least behind me. And so I get out of my car, and the Dutch Bros worker, I'm crying, and she's like, what's going on? And I'm I am so embarrassed. I just ran out of gas. And she's like, oh my, what? And I was like, yeah, I just ran out of gas. My car isn't going to go anywhere. I don't know what to do. And all the people behind me are putting their arms up. We're trying to get places. I'm like, yeah, me too, but I can't. And so then there's a mob of Dutch Bros workers walking out of this building, and I'm just getting more embarrassed by the second. It's I'm telling you, 10 Dutch Bros workers at least, walk out of the door, and they're like, all right, well, we're going to have to push it. And I'm like, okay. So I get back in my car, and one of the things that I specifically remember from my car breaking down in Vancouver was how hard it is to turn the steering wheel when your car is in neutral. And so I'm in the car, and this Dutch Bros, like, there is like it's very narrow of a turn to get from like the straight part to the window. And I'm like kind of freaking out. I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna be strong enough to turn this steering wheel right now. So they start pushing my car, and I did make it, but I turned right into like the first parking space outside of the drive-through, blocking all of the other cars into the drive-through. And so I call my dad, and I'm like, hey, like, I'm frantic. And he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, I just ran out of gas, and I'm really embarrassed, like crying and blah, blah, blah. I just kind of explained the situation while the Dutch Bros workers are now handing me my drink that they have made a large and put sprinkles on because they felt bad, which was great. But so he gets off the phone, says he's coming. So
you called me first?
Before. Oh, no, I called my mom. Actually, I forgot about that. I called my mom, and this was when I was still in the drive-thru, like before I had even been pushed yet. I called my mom, and I'm freaking out, and she's like, what is going on? And I told her what was happening, and she was like, you have to call your dad. And I was like, I don't want him to be mad. Like, I don't want to call my dad right now. Like, he's busy. Like, he's going to be mad. Like, I don't want to. And I don't know why I thought he was going to be mad. But it was just kind of an in the moment thing because I was so worked up about it. I didn't want to be an inconvenience to his day. And so I was like freaking out. And little did I know that Felicia was right next to my mom and could hear what I was screaming on the phone. So my mom's like, well, you have to call your dad. And I was like, okay. So
well, we weren't there. We were at volleyball.
Yeah.
In another city. So.
Yes. So I still waited until I was pushed out to call him. So I had to work up the nerve a little bit. So then I called him. And that's when you came and rescued me.
I hinted earlier, I foreshadowed earlier that you had a unique flex in your first car, a lost art of manual transmission driving. You, of the 4 drivers we have in the family, teen drivers, you are the only one that can drive a manual transmission. Your very first car was a 5-speed manual transmission. What was that like to learn?
That was a lot harder to learn, going from driving like your Pilot and your truck all the time, and then like getting this car and learning to drive it even in just the parking lot of the church down our hill. I probably stalled it like 25 times trying to park and go. It was very challenging and very frustrating because I am naturally, I would say, good at a lot of things. And when I'm challenged with things and I'm not good at them right away, I get a little bit frustrated because, I don't know, I just really don't like it. And so not being great at this right away was something really hard for me to wrap my brain around. And it was just like a whole new ball game. Like, I was always thinking, like, am I going to make this green light? Like, I don't want to have to stop. Like, am I going to have to get stuck on this hill? I'm not getting stuck on this hill. Like, I think I found lots of different back roads just trying to avoid specific hills in town. Like, I would take random roads, like a Beacon Hill, which is how I found my favorite road to drive on. But I was just doing everything in my power to avoid those hills. And it was so hard. And then, I learned, I wouldn't say it took me super long. It was just the first probably like week of like getting in the car and actually having to like figure out how to stop and go were the hardest for me. But once I got the hang of like the balancing on hills and stuff and learned the little tips and tricks behind it, I got pretty good at it. And I really do miss driving it. Sometimes I wish I still drove a manual.
And you still know how.
I do.
And we still have one in the family.
Yeah.
So it's still an option. And you can drive a manual.
Yes.
Because you're not your first car, but one of the early cars you drove was a manual.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things I thought of when you were saying that was we did come to points in teaching our teens how to drive where I had to explain that, like, as far as like the operation of a motor vehicle, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the easiest part of driving. Like operating this machine, this vehicle, is the easy part. Driving and being out on the roads with other drivers and rules of the road and turns and stop signs and stoplights and pedestrians and cyclists, navigating from point A to point B and knowing where point B is from point A, and then adding a point C and D to that. Like, driving is so much bigger than operating a motor vehicle. And so we did get to points during teaching teens to drive where like the driving part was the easy part, and they'd be like, I've got this, let's just go take the test. And it was like, no, you still can't find your way to this location or this location, and you still don't know it all. You still don't know how to drive when it's raining or when it's getting dark, or there's just so many things outside of your control when you're driving that the more experience, the better. And so the more we could expose our teen drivers to that while we were in that first year, especially, the better. And so, but the point of that was the concept that operating the motor vehicle, even a stick shift, is kind of the easy part, and driving around everything else, all the other variables, the hard part. My 2 cents, my opinion. So we did have our bumps in the road. You got to tell the story about you running out of gas. We also have had 4 pretty minor fender benders, literal fender benders. And when I like the first one that comes to mind was Casey's, the oldest, the first driver. She was at a stoplight. The driver in front of her starts to take their feet off the brake or something, but doesn't move, and so she bumps them at like 1 mile an hour. And so that was our first little fender bender. So there was a little bit of paint transfer or something like that. So she got to experience that minor crash, which freaked her out. And we took kind of as a blessing, like, yes, it stinks you got in this crash, you weren't paying attention, whatever the reason, you looked down for a moment and this car stopped or didn't start at all, and so now you've been in the crash. That seemed to have the same like emotional impact that an even more serious crash would have had on her, because she's like, oh, things happen fast and I got in this crash. And so there was a learning lesson that we got to learn at 1 or 2 or 3 miles an hour. And so then Claire, the next driver, she is driving home, and an ambulance or a police car is coming up behind her on a highway, 45 mile an hour highway, and she sees it in the mirror. And so she says at first she thought she was getting pulled over. All the things that go through your mind when an emergency vehicle comes up behind you. Well, she goes to get out of the way very quickly. I won't say she panicked, but she got nervous that she wasn't going to get over quick enough and that she was going to get in trouble. So she sees the lights. She's like, emergency vehicle. And so she gets over very quickly, and she brushes the guardrail. And again, she was going a little bit faster, but it was a side impact, and so very minimal damage, a little bit of paint transfer, and lesson learned. She was pretty upset about that. But again, we got off easy. Her little crash, not that big of a deal, but it was a learning lesson for her. Then Josie, it's a rainy day. You are on your way home from work, or at least you're coming down the road that goes to your work. I don't know where you're coming home from, but you were on your way here, and you are driving that 5-speed in the rain, and you tell it.
Okay, so I was on my way to pick Finnegan, my little brother, up from one of our good friends, her mom, so his friend's grandma, and I was coming from therapy. And so I'm on my way, and I'm forever thankful that he wasn't in the car yet, but I'm on my way to get him, And I was taking this specific way so that it would be a faster / more efficient way to pick him up and get home, because it was raining and I didn't want to be out in the rain for that long. So I turn and I'm probably going like maybe 5 miles per hour, probably not even, like 4. And my car, like, it jolts to the side a little bit. And so I tried to like keep my steering wheel as straight as possible, but I like turned it like slightly to try and correct it, and overcorrected it. So my car spun, like the back of my car spun in a way that like took the front and spun it all the way around. And I went over the sidewalk and into a like garden part of Canterbury, the old people home. And while I was sliding, I hit like a tree stump kind of thing, but it was like a small little tree. And then I just like ran through the like bushes and stuff. And I hit another car like while that was parked in that parking lot. So not on the road driving with me, but was parked in the Canterbury parking lot. And so I called my dad and I was like, Dad, like, I am not sure what to do. And there was nobody like pulled over. Nobody really like even really saw it, honestly. And then this cute little lady comes out from the Canterbury, and I'm like in tears, obviously, because I was like scared and like a little shooken up about it. And she's probably like 70, and she like grabs my hands and she's like, oh, what happened? And I'm like, oh, I just crashed my car. And she's like the first person I see after this happens, so I'm hysterical and I'm just like crying to this old lady. She gives me a hug and she was like, well, like, is someone coming? And so I told her, I was like, yeah, my dad's coming. And then out walks this like handsome man, probably in his like 20s or something. And I explained to him like what happened, because my car is sideways in the parking lot, so anyone who sees that is like, what's going on? So I explained to him what happened. I tell him I hit this other car, and a woman walks up behind him who appears to be maybe his wife or something, because she had a ring and he gave her a hug, and she had flowers in her hand, so it was kind of just like a connecting the dots situation. But as I'm explaining to him that I hit this other car, he was like, oh, that's my car. And I was like, oh. And so I obviously was like apologizing, and he was like, well, it's not technically my car, but it's the one I drive for the company. And I was like, I am so sorry. Like, what can I do? Like, my dad's on the way. And he just like gave me a hug, and I was just standing with his wife, and he was like looking at the car. He was like, it's okay. Like, the insurance on the car, like, we'll pay for it and stuff. And I was obviously just still apologizing, and it was very scary. And I wasn't injured at all, but it was just more of like a scary moment for me. Emotional damage, yeah. Shock.
Yeah. So I remember that was a really rainy day after a long period of dry weather. And so that wet, slick pavement plus the whatever overcorrecting you just did a little cookie and drove up off the road. Flattened a tire, busted a taillight, crunched that other car just a little bit. Totally obliterated a small landscape bush. But otherwise, there are far worse crashes that happen every day, and that was your little lesson in that. And so that was the only crash you've had.
No.
What else did you hit?
Well, this was last school year. I was driving me and my younger sister, Lainey, to school. And this was when she was going to Huntington. Still, she was in 8th grade. and I was driving us to school, and I was going over the smaller bridge, so not the green bridge that I would take to get to my school, but the smaller one that would take me to Huntington. And this car, we were all at the stoplight, this car in front of me like starts to go because the light turns green. The car in front of him starts to go, so we all slowly start rolling forward, and the car in front of him like slams on his brakes, and so he hits the car in front of him and I hit him, and the car in front of him like speeds off. Like, we don't know where he went, but he goes and pulls off into that like Chinese restaurant over by like Catlin Elementary. And so I obviously follow in, and I'm like, I get out of my car and I'm like, oh my gosh, like before I even see who this is, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, what can I do? Like, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what happened. And he gets out of his car and like turns and looks at me, and his first words were, oh my gosh, how are you? And I was like, I'm okay. Like, how are you? So I'm like confused. Like, why are you asking me how I am when I just rammed into the back of your car? And he's like approaching me like he's going to hug me. And so I'm like, what is happening right now? I'm like super confused. And he ends up giving me a hug, and he's like telling me like, oh, sweetheart, like, don't worry about it. Like, don't worry about it. And I realized that it's my ex-boyfriend's grandpa, who is, oh, he's so sweet. And I was like, I could not be more thankful for the person that I hit on this fine morning because he was so nice, so understanding. He was like, don't even worry about it. Like, you get yourself to school. Like, it's no big deal. It wasn't even your fault. Like, it was the person in front of me. It was their fault. And it was just like, it went from like shock and like being scared to like, what is even my luck right now? So yeah, that one was a lot less scary, but it was really funny. It's probably my favorite story of driving.
Was that your green car?
Yeah.
Well, I was getting crunched up.
Yeah.
By then, sounds like. I'm starting to think Savon was maybe right. I take back being offended.
Once again, the like accidents will happen. That's why they call them accidents. I've been in a fair number, but that we're running up against like an hour now, so we'll save those for another day. And then of course, Margot, the fourth of the drivers, parking out here just in front of the house, backed into your car.
Yep.
And that's a story for another day too. Tiny little bit of damage. So let's see. You had an accident. Were you going to share about that?
Yeah, also at 16 or 17, I was leaving the gym and just backed into a very nice high-end vehicle. I obviously did not own a nice high-end vehicle, rather a beater. Anyways, backed into it, crunched it, reparked, went back into the gym, proceeded to ask every person in there, excuse me, is that your nice Audi out there? Blue, brand new. And it was, of course, owned by a very handsome, slightly older than me young man, and actually not his parents. So quite the humbling experience. But again, he was very kind about the accident. Actually, I think he told his parents he was just going to say he got like hit and run in the grocery parking lot. But I didn't lie. That was him. And that was pretty much it. I backed into a couple garbage cans, and
you ran over the hose reel.
I ran over the hose reel. That was like 2 weeks ago, so.
She said, you put this somewhere different. I'm like, that is exactly where it always is.
You did put it somewhere different.
Yeah, where it goes.
Right in the way of how I'm supposed to back into the garage.
Just to recap, we we touched and discussed a comment that was left after my last video, which a tiny little segment of which was about working as a teenager and building confidence and experience and lessons and responsibility for teen drivers, and why I thought that worked really well for me and how I thought that played into any success I've had, and how we embrace that philosophy for our kids, and that in small chunks at a time, we've taught them to drive. We've made them work to fund it now, and it is optional. They don't have to, but to a man, each of the 4 of those girls so far have chosen to. I believe the 5th one will as well. Work and drive and enjoy the freedom plus responsibility with some bumps in the road and the lessons that those teach us. And so I respect the comment. I believe with that context, I stand by the way we're doing business. I believe it directly develops experience and mental acuity, as mentioned in the comment, in our young people. And I think that in this controlled environment is where that comes from, where it should come from. And that this is how you get kids out of your house and into the world. If that's the goal, is for them to be their own little successful people, I believe this is one way, a pathway there. And so those are my final thoughts. Josie, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I like the way that we do it. I like that I have had the experience with my job, and I think that it's taught me a lot of life lessons that I would have otherwise kind of just been thrown into when, like, even with just going to college and being surrounded by strangers, I feel as though I wouldn't have been as comfortable talking to those people as I will be now that I've had all of this experience with my job. And I also think that for me, it just, like, it makes me feel good about myself that when I treat myself to things, or I, like, pay for a part of my car or something, like, it feels good that I know that I worked for it and I wasn't just, like, handed, like, to me. So I like the way that we do it, and I think that it's what works for our family best.
Flea, closing thoughts on the comment or the philosophy?
I guess my closing thought would just be that I am deeply appreciative of how you father the kids, how you run the family, and how we as a parenting team, all the parents, have decided to raise these kids. And I just continue to be amazed by the beautiful people they've become, how independent they are, the leaders they are, and I wouldn't do it any different.
Awesome. Well, Savane7264, thanks for giving us something to talk about. You never have an expectation that would change anyone's mind on the internet, so maybe you stand by what you said. I think this is working for us, so thanks for giving us something to talk about. Thanks, Dad, for making me work and giving me something to pass along. And so, on that, I'm MCNEW, and this is Duty, Grit, and Grinds. Thanks for watching.